continue with the former President Jacob Zuma's reaction to the state capture report, where his foundation confirmed that Zuma will challenge the report as far as it relates to him. The foundation further announced that they'll be reporting Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to the Judicial Service Commission within the next week or two. Now, for analysis and reaction to this, I am joined by Angelo Fick, who is the director of the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute. Angelo, thank you so much for joining us. We've just come out of that briefing with the Jacob Zuma Foundation and the findings that they've given, and they referred to this report as unlawful and highly irrational, that the report is full of gossip, innuendo and conjecture, and that it's short of evidence, and that it has just passed the buck to the NPA with regards to doing investigations. What's your take on what the foundation has now given to us as a statement?
Well, they've certainly used a lot of words to occupy whoever was listening to them for however long they spoke, but I'm not certain that their use of those words is the conventional use of those words. To use a word like unlawful for a judicial report that the person on whose behalf you're speaking commissioned strikes me as being even parallel to the twilight zone. So there's very little to be said about what it is that Mr. Manye divulged in that particular conference, and also his responses to some of the questions. Can it best be called obfuscatory because they're simply confused and confounded rather than clarified.
Well, I mean, they make a number of accusations. They want to challenge the appointment of Chief Justice Zondo, and that he gave a dismal performance during the interview session. He was the lowest on the list, and yet he emerged top of the position. They also make a lot of inferences to his relationship to the sitting president. Do you think they have any basis or there's any findings on these accusations?
Well, the burden of proof lies on them. This is, after all, a person who was appointed by Jacob Zuma when he was president of the country to head the commission, having taken the name from, the then Chief Justice, Mogoeng. And so to be hoisted by your own petard is a cliche. To be hoisted by your own actions in this instance seems to be more than tragic. To dismiss the report in these sweeping terms strikes me as more of a political than a legal gesture. It'll be interesting to see what happens to the legal papers and what the details are in the legal papers that presumably they wish to serve to the JSC in their complaints about this, 6-volume long, multi-hundreds of thousands of words long document, and where it is that they suggest and how they suggest that this is gossip, because there is evidence record that is quoted, and there are many problems with the report at the basic level of editorial, the need for there to be some kind of editorial oversight and some corrections of errors of preposition, errors of comma usage, but to suggest that the process we all sat through for almost 5 years is a process that is now simply dismissible as gossip is to me, operating from some kind of parallel universe of desperation that really doesn't require or doesn't, shouldn't be taken seriously and given the amount of airtime that it seems to be given at the moment.
Well, I mean, they speak to the unlawfulness in how the commission was set up in the first instance. Do they not have any basis there?
Well, this is not a new accusation. This is an accusation that had come up before, which was part of the reasoning used by the Jacob Zuma legal team in their challenge of the Constitutional Court to have Justice Zondo recuse himself. And it fell flat then. So this is about legal reasoning rather than what you desire to have happen. And I think that this is where this press conference, this media conference, was far more performative for political reasons, to try and sketch their Mr. Zuma once again as the victim of large processes and elaborate conspiracies. And this is really odd because, this was the man who was the head of state and initiated this process. And so to now call the entire process unlawful is to then suggest that when he initiated it, he was engaged in an act that he is now calling unlawful. This seems quite odd. But, I'm sure in the kind of short memory span of the performative commentariat, what you'll see is various people trying to find credence in these accusations by rewriting history, by reimagining history, by forgetting the last 2 decades that we've lived through. And that the establishment of these organs of state happened under the ANC's, watch, under its governance, and that this particular process started under Jacob Zuma's administration. And so to now make these sweeping claims that try to dismiss the entire process is somehow compromised, while still suggesting that you're going to engage the JSC to try and get them to fix what is there are levels of error in analysis that are simply astounding. And the many, many contradictions in Mr. Manyi's responses means that I can't take it as seriously as people seem to want to demand that it be taken.
Well, as much as that's quite serious, and we're also having other serious issues happening right here in Gauteng, an ANC member from Ekurhuleni has launched an urgent interdict to overturn the decision to allow the ANC Gauteng conference to go ahead. Now, in the papers filed today by Jabulani Sithole, who wants the National Executive Committee's decision on Thursday to endorse the conference going ahead to be overturned. During a special ANC-NEC meeting, the highest decision-making structure of the organization deferred the issue of the 19 quarantined votes emanating from the Ekurhuleni Elective Conference to the Provincial Executive Committee. Yesterday, the PEC announced that these 5 branches would form part of the voting processes of conference and then quarantined until the dispute is resolved. Sithole has asked the court to hear the matter at 6:30 this evening. Now, Mr. Fick, this is also just coming in with regards to the ANC elective conference that's happening in Gauteng. What's your take on this interdict?
So I fully expected this to end up in the courts because, these are desperate times that seem to be calling for more and more desperate measures. The governing party recognizes, and the governing party or the party that governs the country and that governs Gauteng knows that it is in dire straits. And we've heard this from Mr. Mantashe and from, various figures in the party, that this is also about 2024. So for me, there are short-term and long-term visions inside the ANC. And the short-term vision is winning in the immediate contestation at the end of 2022 to maintain and satisfy patronage networks that have been set up over the last 20 to 30 years. And then there are people in the national section of the party who have their eye on 2024 and beyond and wish to keep control and reins of control of the reins of power beyond 2024 and know that if they fail in these elections in 2022, 2024 and beyond begins to look a lot more dire. We've heard this from Mr. Mantashe himself. And so it's important for us to bear in mind that these kinds of contestations are usual and have become usual at least over the last 10 years. And so this court challenge to what the NEC decided the PAC should do is not particularly surprising. How successful this will be remains to be seen, because the court will have to take into account the ANC's own internal constitution and the power that it grants to the NEC not only to make decisions, but to second some of those decisions to subsidiary bodies. And so it'll be interesting to hear what a court that is appealed at 6:30 tonight has to say about procedures followed inside the party by the party's own rules, and whether or not this particular bid to change the decision of the PEC will succeed.
Do we know why the NEC pushed that responsibility to the incoming PEC, especially when it came to regions such as Ekurhuleni and Tshwane?
One imagines that because they consider it to be an internal matter and they didn't want the PEC to have to, at some later stage, appeal a decision that they have made. And so the devolution of power inside the ANC is one aspect of the centralization of power. And that kind of contradiction might sound strange to people, but you really do want some kind of bottom-up democracy as well as top-down vanguardism. And this is how the party has traditionally functioned quite well. And so to make the decision more legitimate, you make the lower bodies make the decision and come to what they call democratic centralization, so that you don't end up with a decision that's top-down that can then be challenged by multiple players at the lower levels. You then devolve the decision one level down, and they can devolve it to the regional level, and the regional level down to the branches, and the branches then do it from the bottom up. And my sense is that in putting the decision inside the PEC, the idea was that the PEC would have a greater sense of the internal dynamics of the provincial makeup, as well as the various regional matrices that make up that provincial makeup, and unlikely to be able to have their decision challenged as being that of outsiders and thereby delegitimated, that this is part of the process of respecting bottom-up democracy's mixture with top-down vanguardism.
Now, just to unpack the Gauteng elective conference a little bit more, we do know that the top seat of chairperson is being contested by Lebogang Maile and Lesofie. And Maile, who seems to be enjoying a lot of support from Tshwane in the West Rand, and Lesofie more from the Sedibeng regions, and Ekurhuleni in Johannesburg sort of split in between with both parties. But if regions were to cast their votes based on what these two gentlemen have contributed to the party, and most importantly to society with regards to service delivery, who do you think would come out tops?
Well, that's a rational decision-making process that I don't think in any political process is necessarily the case. Let's not forget that party politics in South Africa across political party divisions are about patronage networks. And so here it is, and we saw this with Zandile Gumede's election in eThekwini. And in Gauteng, we're likely to see the same kinds of dynamics play a role here. So firstly, this is the economic heartland of the country and the region. It's also the space where the capital of the country happens to be. Now, the ANC has lost the elections in both the Johannesburg city as well as in the Tshwane Metro. And these kinds of losses means that they've lost control over the levers of power that give access to resources. And so what you've seen is a failure of the patronage network to kick in and keep people at the bottom end of that long trail of trickle-down resources satisfied. And they've recently seen the same thing in Ekurhuleni. And so what you see in Ekurhuleni is a party that used to govern a part of the province that used to have very good feedback from the Auditor General, from various monitors of municipal service delivery. And as the corruption, maladministration, wasteful expenditure set in over the last 5 years, we've seen that disappear. So what each of these figures, both Lesofie and Maile, have to focus on is returning people who have now been left out of the networks back into networks. And in the short term, that means playing to people's demands on the ground. But they also have to keep those networks stable beyond 2024 if they wish to return to municipal governance and if they wish to maintain provincial government control, as David Makhura is insisting must be the case beyond 2024. So what's at stake here is that both parties have to deliver not just what work they've done for the party, but the elaborate network that Gwede Mantashe defended, that Cyril Ramaphosa defended, which is cadre deployment, and the cadre deployment down to the branch level. And that, I think, is the balancing act for the party in Gauteng. They sit out of power in two municipalities where major resources could generate and has generated benefit for their networks inside the party. And they now risk losing control of a province in which you have the majority of South Africa's economic stake vested. And that's, I think, that would be the last domino in the sort of collapse of the party's performance nationally, because it cannot relegate itself to being a rural or peripheral party and continue to imagine it's going to govern a country that is fast urbanizing. And that, I think, I'm not going to call which one is likely to win, but that's the challenge both of those figures face at the provincial level, because there are national stakes.
All right, that's Mr. Angelo Fick. Thank you so much. It seems we have lost him there. But thank you for the inputs that you've given us with regards to the response to the Jacob Zuma Foundation that they've given in the immediate press briefing that we've just witnessed, as well as unpacking the ANC Gauteng elective conference, which we know now there's an interdict that has been put in place until it's heard at 6:30 this evening. Now,